In 2023, I read 37 books. So here is my top 10 list of the 10 best books of the books that were read by me last year. Let's get into it, baby.
Oh, he's technically Mexican and 3/4 American, but for 3 generations he's got that nationality. Great-great-grandpa headed south, whose kids as kids then turned around. It's not what the show's about, but it's why he's Mexican technically. It helps that he was raised in New Mexico, lived in Guadalajara for 2 years, speaks fluent Spanish with a bachelor's degree in language, and makes a mean taquito.
First off, some disclaimers, because I know this video is like a month late if we're doing like a year in review type thing.
You're late.
But for most of January, I couldn't speak. I had a cold for an entire week, and then I lost my voice for the next couple weeks. So I finally recovered from that, and we're doing a top 10 list. Now, these are not all books that came out last year. Most of them aren't, because I am not on top of that stuff like I should be, and I stopped reading for a long time. So for the last couple years, I've been catching up on all the stuff that I should have been reading this whole time. But without further ado, let's get into it, baby.
Let's do this.
Number 10, my least favorite of my favorites, which makes it sound a lot worse than it is, because it's good. It's a good book. I didn't read a lot of bad books this year, so most of them were good, so if they made the list, they're bangers, baby. Where was I? Number 10, a book that actually did come out this year. It's Brandon Sanderson's Frugal Wizard's Guide to Surviving Medieval England. I think I got that title right. Part of his year of Sanderson and writing a whole bunch of books in secret, Frugal Wizard was his secret project number 2, and I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic book in a wonderfully whimsical world setting. It obviously gives off Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy vibes and is very similar to another author who might be also making this list, Terry Pratchett. Oops, I didn't cough at the right time. But this book was wonderfully silly and also just really well written. I had a fantastic time. It was a fun romp. And I would love for Sando to write more books in this universe.
I write more books in 1 year than you read, Fraser.
Yes, well.
With more weird interdimensional touristy things. It was a lot of fun. I heard a lot of people didn't like this one, and I think they're silly, because I loved it, and maybe they're just butthurt that it wasn't part of the Cosmere. But like, you got 3 whole Cosmere books this year, so don't maybe don't complain about that.
But I wanted 4.
And I wanted 3.
But yeah, Frugal Wizard, it was fantastic. It wasn't the best book I've ever read, but it just barely made my top 10 list of the books that I read. So moving on, baby, what's it gonna be? Number 9 was Isaac Asimov's Foundation. I was not expecting to like this book as much as I did. I have not read a whole lot of sci-fi. I've read significantly more fantasy, but I occasionally dabble in sci-fi, but it's something that I definitely want to do more of in the future, and actually did quite a bit of this year. But outside of fantasy and science fiction, I pretty much don't really go there. I'm a pretty big nerd, so I don't do a lot of nonfiction, and I don't do sappy romance novels because I'm not gay.
So long, gay boys!
So in trying to educate myself and broaden my horizons, I read Isaac Asimov's Foundation, and I loved it. It started off a little bit dry, and I was worried it was going to be hard to get into, but it very quickly just engrossed me. I don't know if I'm using the tense of that verb correctly. I became engrossed in Foundation. Can it go the other way around? I don't know. I'm not an English major, okay? I loved how different Foundation was. I'd never read anything like it. And it was fascinating how uniquely the narrative was structured. Because you get to skip like hundreds of years between chapters and see how society has progressed. Wonderfully entertaining. I immediately wanted to start reading the sequels and companion series, like the robots that I know tie in to the Foundation series in future books. But I had a lot of other stuff that was a higher priority on my TBR. But it is definitely a series that I will be returning to in the future very, very soon. So that gets number 9, Foundation. It was really fun. And coming in at number 8, we have Dragon Guard by Blake and Raven Penn. I really liked this book. This is book 2 in the series of the Stone Sky, this Dragon, the Sky Stone Chronicles. That's what it was. And this is a completely unbiased review because, disclaimer, I am friends with the authors. Book 2 in their series is really good. I actually had a lot of problems with the first book in the series, which I still enjoyed, but the second book is just, it's a massive improvement. It's really good. Book 1 had a couple of narrative problems that made it a little bit harder to get into, but it was still good.
Still good.
And I'm not even the target demographic for this series. It's a YA series with a lot of young people romance that, I'm 30 years old. It doesn't exactly float my boat, but the book is so well written that I liked it anyway, and it made my top 10 list. So check out that series if you're in for a more lighthearted fantasy romp. It was a lot of fun. And moving on to number 7, an author that I already mentioned, Terry Pratchett, baby. I love Terry Pratchett's Discworld books. I use them as palate cleansers. If I read a really depressing book, I follow it up with a Terry Pratchett chaser. So I read a lot of Discworld this year, and I liked all but one of them because they're just good, solid comedy romps, usually averaging around like a 7 out of 10, but not all of them are 10 out of 10. My favorite Discworld book that I read from this year, which is the only one to make my top 10 list, is Small Gods.
Took a while, but they got there. They got there.
This book is hilarious. It's also more of a standalone story, so it's not part of any of the bigger series within Discworld, so you can totally pick it up without any prior knowledge, just like you can with Going Postal, and it is so funny with a wonderfully unique premise that just kills the whole time. And the main character is super entertaining, and the baddies are super interesting too. I had a great time with Small Gods. So moving on to number 6, we got another sci-fi series that I started this year, and it's number 4 in the series, The God Emperor of Dune. Oh my gosh. I've liked all of the Dune books so far, but God Emperor of Dune is so wild and weird and fascinating. It engrossed me. Again, tell me if that's legal to say.
It's not.
The God Emperor of Dune, it's just like, I can't tell you anything about it, but it's so good. And you got to read the first 3 to get there. And I enjoyed all 3 of those ones, but man, this one's a 10 out of 10. It's so good. He's a worm boy doing a bunch of philosophy in his head. I mean, come on.
Hasta la vista, worm boy.
It was fun, and it gets number 6. And number 5 on my list is another Brandon Sanderson secret project, The Sunlit Man. This book was by far the best of Sanderson's secret projects. It was a beautiful story that was just had a wonderful sci-fi fantasy premise that was just fascinating the whole time. It was wonderfully paced and tense the whole time, and it's Stormlight adjacent, and I just eat up Stormlight stuff. I'm a big fan of the series, so it was really fun to see a little kind of spin-off character-driven essay in that universe. I love the fact that it's a Western, it's a one-off. The guy shows up, he helps the people in the village, and then he rides off into the sunset at the end. Except it's sci-fi, so he teleports off into the sunset.
Peace.
Oh my goodness. I loved The Sunlit Man. It was so much fun to read. And that's all I have to say about that.
That's all I have to say about that.
So moving up further to number 4, I've already just praised this book to high heaven. But number 4 in my top 10 list is Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. Holy moly-oly. This book blew my mind.
Mind blown.
Despite actually liking where the story goes in the next book, Xenocide, even more, I think that Speaker for the Dead is the better book, because Xenocide is kind of like half a story, and the last part, Children of the Mind, kind of finishes off the narrative. So while I there's elements from Xenocide that I love way, like, even more than Speaker for the Dead, it's as a standalone book, like it's Speaker for the Dead is just a little bit better. But like, Xenocide should also probably be somewhere on this top 10 list, but I didn't want to pick two books from the same series. Okay, that felt like cheating. So number 4 is Speaker for the Dead. That's it. But zooming on down the line to number 3 in my top 10 list is The Blood Mirror by Brent Weeks. This is part of his Lightbringer series. It's book 4 in the series. I read the whole series this year. Actually, in a month, I read all 5 books, 5 weeks. It took me, I read one a week because I'm crazy.
I read them all.
I loved all of them, and again, some of the other books in this series might be better than the other books on this top 10, but I'm only going to pick one from the series, and book 4 was absolutely my favorite. Book 4 is a masterpiece. I loved everything in this book. It really connected with me personally, and it is phenomenal. Although, my favorite moment from the entire series is from book 5, The Burning White, but book 4 is a better book. So it's kind of the same situation as the Speaker for the Dead. Really, it's the whole series. Number 3 on my list is Lightbringer. Like, all 5 books. Read them all. It's an amazing series. And number 2, the penultimate book on my list. Second place, it is Gunmetal Gods by Zamil Akhtar. Holy crap. This book just blew my mind.
You know, you say that a lot.
I didn't know you could write books like that. Everything about it is just special. It is a masterpiece. 10 out of 10. It's an 11 out of 10. This book is brutal tragedy of just cosmic proportions. It gets a teeny tiny little bit inappropriate for all my Christian friends out there.
No, that whole thing's it's inappropriate. I can't say that in the workplace, can I?
Same with the Blood Mirror, the last one, number 3. There's a little bit of sensuality in those 2 books, but it's worth the ride.
Very poor choice of words.
But that's like my disclaimer warning to my morally conscious audience. Just be prepared for a little bit higher up there on the inappropriateness scale. But that is number 2 on my list. So before I reveal my top pick of 2023, we got to do the honorable mentions, which is, I think it's worthwhile to mention all of the other books that I read. There really weren't any, like, horrible books. I liked all of them. Again, I'm a Sanderson fan. I liked Tress the Emerald Sea. I liked Yumi the Nightmare Painter. I also read Arcanum Unbounded for the first time this year. So it was all his short stories in the Cosmere, which I'm pumped. I'm ready. I'm caught up. I'm ready for Stormlight Book 5. You can pretty much just expect that to be really high up on my list in 2024, okay? Again, I read a whole bunch of Discworld. I read Guards, which was phenomenal. I read Mort, which was almost as good as Small Gods, man. That's like a 9 out of 10. I read Equal Rights, which was my least favorite of the Discworld books I've read so far. It was like a 6. It was still entertaining. Most of the book was boring, but then, like, the ending was actually phenomenal. I loved the ending of that book. It's just the rest of it wasn't that great. I read The Light Fantastic, which was like 10 times better than The Color of Magic, which I didn't love. And, like, the Light Fantastic actually, like, retroactively fixes a lot of the problems that I had with the first book. So that one's amazing. I read Moving Pictures, which was pretty good. That's like an 8 out of 10. And I loved his YA book in Discworld, the Amazing Maurice and his Educated Rodents. That was like a 9 out of 10 for me. And it was a YA book. I cried. I cried at the end of Amazing Maurice. That book's fantastic. Read that book with your kids. It's freaking good. Or just read it by yourself if you don't have kids. It's a good book. I reread The Dragon Reborn, book 3 from The Wheel of Time, which definitely would have been somewhere on my top 10 if I hadn't already read it. This one was disqualified because it was a reread. Okay, and it was one of my favorites from the series. It wouldn't have counted. It wouldn't have counted if I put it on the list. It would have meant less.
We were eliminated on a technicality.
But man, read Wheel of Time. It's so good, and stay away from that ugly TV show. I read Homeland by Ari Salvatore, the one of the Drizzt books, which I realized I actually read out of order. It comes first chronologically, but not. It wasn't written first. It's not a release date order. So I should have started with Icewind Dale, and I only read the one book in the series, but I know there's 3 books in that in the prequel, and then there's 3 books in the Icewind Dale. I'll commit to reading those 6. I don't know if I'll go further in the series just because there's so many, and I've got a bunch of other stuff on my TBR, but I definitely want to read more Drizzt books in the future. I read Jade City by Fonda Lee, which was I think I wanted to like more than I did. It's very well written. I just didn't vibe with it as much. I will eventually come back to the series and finish the trilogy, but it's not super high up on my TBR. It's like a 7 out of 10. It was good. It was a really good book. And again, most of these, it's pretty hard to find a book that dropped under a 7 out of 10 that I read this year. I read the first 2 books in the Ascension series by Andrew Rowe. I read Sufficiently Advanced Magic, which I really enjoyed. That one was probably sitting at like number 11 in this list. I thought it was a really, really fun fantasy grind book about leveling up and fighting. It was very, very entertaining. And the second book was almost as good, but then randomly had some just woke stuff just like shoehorned in the middle of the book that really pulled me out of the world that he was trying to build. It was like very clearly modern day politics being kind of It felt forced, but I still liked the book. I wish that wasn't in there. It wasn't enough to ruin the series, but it did. It dropped the book like a whole letter grade for me. I do want to keep going in the series because I like the story, I like the characters, but I hope that that's not like a continuing problem, and it kind of feels like it's gonna be. So approach those ones, at your own discrepancy. I also read the first book in the Skyball trilogy Dragon series by Blake and Raven Penn. Dragon Thief, but Dragon Guard was better, boys. You did better on the second run, okay? So it didn't make my list. I also read the sequel to Gunmetal Gods this year, Conqueror's Blood, which I liked better. I liked it better than Gunmetal Gods until the ending. The ending wasn't nearly as good as the execution of the ending to Gunmetal Gods. It was still good. It wasn't a bad ending, but it just didn't drive home the book with as much poetry as the first book did. So I reading it, I actually liked the book more than Gunmetal Gods, but after finishing it just wasn't as perfect of a book. And I'm really looking forward to reading book 3, which is already out, and book 4 should be like dropping like any day soon. Like I know that's coming. I'm really looking forward to reading those, to reading the rest of the series, because man, Zamil Akhtar, he's a genius. This guy is going to go far. He's going to go places, and I'm going to be there reading about those places that he's going.
Oh, the places you'll go.
I read the other Dune books. I read Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and I stopped at book 4. I will eventually read 5 and 6, and maybe even book 7, which was written by Frank Herbert's son. But they're not super high up on my priorities because I know he died before he could finish the story, so it's not finished. But I will get around to those eventually. I know I'm going to go back to it. Might not be next year. And of course, I read the other books in the Lightbringer series. They're all good. I already talked about it. Not talking about Lightbringer anymore. I read The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. It was good. I didn't like it at first.
I am a sinner.
Louder, Daniel! I am a sinner!
I am a sinner.
I am sorry, Lord.
The first third of the book, I wasn't vibing with. But then halfway through, something clicked. And I started absolutely loving The Hobbit.
You are forgiven.
It's not as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but it is a fun, really, really well-written story. I liked The Hobbit. And the last book to mention, which was actually the last book I read this year, which was Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné. I'm saying it right. Melniboné. Elric of Melniboné, which is actually like 4 books. Technically, I read 40 books this year, guys. And if you want to count all the novellas from Arcanum Unbounded separately, that's a lot of books. I read a lot of books this year, guys. But I'm not counting it. I'm not counting it because they're short. I really liked Elric. It was a lot of fun. Doesn't make my top 10, but it's worth reading, and I'm going to do a live stream with a couple friends talking about it because that series is worth talking about. And that's it. Whew. What a list. That's everything I read in 2023 with the top. That's the top 9. The top 9 and all the other mentions. And I could happily recommend most of those books. It was a good year. It was a bad year for Hollywood. There were hardly any good movies, but I read a lot of good books. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed my list, and we will end this video with the number 1 book that I read in 2023. And it's surprisingly nonfiction. The number 1 book I read in 2023 by a long shot was The Book of Mormon. This book is so good. It literally changed my life, and if you read it, it can change your life too. I mean, it's crazy. The ending of the book invites you to pray to God, to ask him if it's true. And guess what? It is, baby. I highly recommend reading the Book of Mormon because it could totally change your life too for the better and make you happier. And who knows, if you do, you'll probably feel the Spirit testifying to you of its veracity. And one day, you might just get baptized, sinners.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. If it's true, please take a minute to subscribe to the channel, and you can join us along for the ride. And if you pay me, I'll try to be more entertaining, so please consider joining Patreon.